Okay, so let's start Mint for external manufacturing session 2. So in the last call, we discussed the basics that we need to know the supply chain rules, supplier customer rules. We also need to understand the application ownership, who is owner and who is partner. A supplier can be Mint owner or a customer can be Mint owner and vice versa, partner can be both, one of both. Then define the applicable transactions. What transactions are we going to implement, PO, POAC, invoices, and so on. And the choreography as well, which choreography it falls into. If we will know that if we understand the supply chain rules, what they are trying to achieve, and so on. Then define the file formats. What are the formats in which the customers are going to exchange the data, QI, IDOC, and so on. And then the preferred B2B method, whether the partners are going to use SFTP, AS2, so on. Right. So these are some of the basic stuff that we should understand before we go ahead and start configuring our systems. Once we have identified that, we should always keep in mind this diagram where a company sends a document. So from external systems, the document comes Opus via Opus Gateway, which is B2B, which is XTD application, where you create B2B connection. And then certain processing happens on the transaction itself based on how we have configured it. It gets delivered to the business application, and then it follows the outbound path and gets delivered on the outbound side. Again, the receiver side would also have the XTD because it is an enterprise application. Then what we did is we did a hands-on where we added the master data of partner into owner's master data, partner master data, right? So we added partner master data there, and then the Mint owner created a process network, right? So we created a process network for Mint application, and then we assigned roles. So for our hands-on purposes, what we did is we were trying to send a purchase order document from a Mint owner to a partner. So the roles that were applicable for owner were all transaction owner admin, which would allow you to see and see like info exchange, very similar to info exchange, where you will see the transactions and statuses of that. And then the manufacturing customer and expanded and standard rules that will allow you to see the details of the transaction. So purchase order details, the line items, the sender receiver, and so on. We also discussed roles required for supporting applications, right? So for XTT, CTCM, company admin, master data. Then once the process network was created, we created a link between owner and partner. Okay. We created a link because the partner was already added into the master data. When we tried creating a link that appeared, the partner appeared in the dropdown, and then we assigned the link to the partner as well, so that when partner user logs into the system, they will be able to access this process network using these roles, right? These are available roles for an admin user on partner side, and they can then decide from partner side which user needs access to which type of role. But these are the roles that will be available for them for owner's process network. Then we created a B2B connection, and for our hands-on, we are working to create a B2B SFTP connection. So these SFTP connections are applicable on both the sides, on sender and receiver side. So, just I'm saying sender and receiver, I'm not saying owner and partner, right? Because now the configuration is in context of a sender and receiver. Owner created a process network, created link, that's it. Now, either Mint owner can send a transaction to a partner, or partner can send a transaction to Mint owner. And in most of the cases, this will be bidirectional. So owner sends PO, partner replies with PO, right? So that is why we are using the word sender and receiver. So B2B connections will be created on both the sides, sender and receiver. the process remains same on both the sides. So what we will do is on Opus, you can go to XTT AWS Enterprise application on the user interface, create the SFTP connection by yourself. The SFTP connection is authenticated by a key file, so public and private keys. So public keys will go into the connection that you're creating. You'll keep the private key and the passphrase for the private key. To generate public and private key, we can use one of the options that are available from open source, that is Partition, and we create public and private keys. Then we create, so on owner side, as we discussed, we created a SFTP connection of the choreography type X12. And then on the partner side, we can create a B2B connection of choreography type other, because we are going to receive IDOC. Okay, so we had completed this step, I hope. And then what we did is we had to configure the transforms. So on the owner side, since owner is going to send a purchase order in X12 format, so the transform applicable was B2B EDI X12 850 purchase order inbound before. And then partner is going to receive this transaction outbound in IDOC format. So we have the those transforms names available as well. Okay, we always start from the right. So we start from creating transform sets first. That is what we had done in the last call. And on today's call, we'll start with connection association. So I'll just go there and discuss why it shows inbound and outbound and what is the logic there. Okay. Yeah. So before we go to connection association, let's just make sure that we have transform sets created. And these are the normal transforms, standard transform sets created. And those transform sets are also associated to the SFTP connection, right? So till this point, I assume it is done. And if you have any issues till this point, you can ask a question. Otherwise, we'll move to the connection association stream. So I'll pause for any questions or any issues till this point for some time. Does anyone have any questions so far?
So these all four transforms should be at the sender side.
No. So one is for send, one is, so if you see, there is a purchase order inbound, and then there is a purchase order outbound. So on sender side, it will be inbound, and on the receiver side, it will be outbound. There is no harm if you keep it that way. Okay, so if there are no other questions, we'll assume that you've been able to associate the transform set with the SFTP connection. Okay. Now you can verify your transform set screen again just one more time. There should be two transform sets there. One is your standard transform set for converting the customer format into canonical or canonical to outbound format. And then there should be another one for post-processing transform sets. I'll talk about that also. And how those will be associated. But by this time, you should see those two types of transform sets on your transform set screen. Okay, so very quickly, connection association. So that's the next part. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see my screen, right? A tracing instance, I'm logged in.
Yes.
Okay, so transform sets, as we were talking about it earlier. You will see your company should have at least two transform set. One is for post-processing transform. Again, the naming convention that we are following here is network name hyphen PPT. PPT stands for post-processing transforms. They will not be associated. So this transform set will not be associated to any B2B connection or entity. So if I show you what post-processing transform I have configured in my system, these are called PPT generic all orchestrations V1. It's because my company has only one single process network. So I don't have any post-processing transform specific to my company. This is a pretty generic post-processing transform that can be deployed. And this is the catalog type private, which means it is deployed only to my company. Now, again, the same post-processing transform can be deployed to other companies also. And then these different transaction types I have. So okay. One more thing is it is the same post-processing transform set irrespective of the transaction type. Okay. Okay, and the other transform set that you will have, it would be associated to a B2B connection. So when a transaction is sent on a B2B connection, inbound or outbound, then that transaction passes through this transform set, and there would be a transform set associated for each transaction. Okay. Now, connection association, what does this do? So as soon as you create a B2B connection in the XTT application, right? By default, all the connections that you create in your XTT application, they are associated at company level for inbound. Okay, so what does that mean? 1 second, coming up. No problem. It will come. Okay. Yeah. So what does that mean? In my company, I have multiple B2B connections that I have created. If I create one more, right? And if I come here and click on apply, by default, you will not see this entry, so you can ignore this entry for now. This has been added by me later. By default, all those B2B connections would be for inbound, they would be associated with the company, right? So in my company, I can have in my company master data, I have one entity as company, then I can have multiple entities as locations, right? So by default, any connection that I create on XTT, and it can be any type of connection, SFTP, AS2, SMTP, and so on, they will all be associated at the company level for inbound, which means that all the transactions that are coming in, they will be coming in at company level. Okay. And there are other slides that explains these concepts in detail. What happens if it comes on company level versus location level and so on. So that is one thing that is done by the system. That is, if you want to change it, you can change it. You can associate it to a location level and so on. You'll have to delete it and specifically associate it with a location. Now for outbound, that is not done implicitly. So we'll have to create an outbound association. Okay. Now, since we talked about the exchange of the documents are bidirectional. Okay. So if in my company, I'm sending a purchase order inbound, this works. But in the same company, I am expecting that partner will send a purchase order acknowledgement from their side, and that would get delivered outbound on my B2B connection. Okay. On the same B2B connection on a different one, that's a separate matter. So for now, we are concerned about the same B2B connection. So if I send a PO inbound, XTT receives it, B2B processes it, Mint then does apply business logic on it, sends document outbound. On partner side, there should be an outbound association for this B2B connection. Okay. Then partner sends PO at inbound, same process gets followed. And on owner side, we have to create an outbound association. So for the outbound association, what you'll do is you'll click on add outbound association, select the B2B connection for which you want to create the association. And for this session, so we are not getting into advanced sessions yet. For this session, we will not change anything. We'll just select the B2B connection and click on add. Right? That's the only thing that we are going to do. We are not going to select any of the other options. Also, so on this screen, we just added the selected the B2B connection and then simply scroll down and clicked on add. Now, also, let's make sure when we are doing this, if in the test system that you're working on, there are more than one B2B connections, then what you should what you should make sure of is that not all the B2B connection, if you have more than one, not all the B2B connections are associated with the same entity for outbound. Okay. If there are, for example, two B2B connections, if they are both are associated for inbound at company level, that's all fine. There is no problem with that. But if you see there are two B2B connections and for outbound, they are associated with the same level, you will have to delete one of them. That's because when a document is sent inbound, a customer chooses in which B2B connection you will have to drop the document, right? So that is selected by the customer. When the document is getting delivered outbound, that decision is made by B2B. That's whether should I send this to B2B connection 1 or 2. But if all the criteria are same, if the B2B connection is associated at company level for more than one connection, then B2B will not know which is the correct connection where it should send the document, right? So that's why for outbound, it should ideally fail, but it doesn't fail. It just picks up the random one, any random one, and sends the transaction. At least that's what we have found out in our testing. So just make sure if you have more than one B2B connection for outbound, you at least remove entry from one of the connections so that you can make sure which connection your outbound document. Now, finally, what we'll do is we will set up the inbound configuration for owner, right? So what is the inbound configuration? So if you remember our block diagram where the transaction was coming in, there is only one setting which would tell the system that what is the post-processing transform through which the inbound transaction should go to so that it can resolve the process network on and resolve the subtype, right? So that's the only setting that is applicable for inbound. Okay. Now, what we'll do is we will go back to the system. And let me for now skip link settings and go to message settings. Okay. So what you'll see here is for my system, what I'll do is I'll click on configure inbound message settings. I'll select application owner as multi enterprise information network tower for my company. Sender company or location is always going to be company. And there is an option to set the transform set here, right? When you click on this, this will show you all the transform sets you've enabled on the transform set screen. But we will only select the post-processing transform set here. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and click on save. Okay. We'll not get into the concept of link identifier as of now. We'll discuss that later. Okay. So this is the only inbound message setting that is required on the owner side. For partners, when they are sending the transactions, they are sending it to owner's mint, right? They are sending the inbound transaction to owner's mint. So there is no other setting required for partners to send the messages inbound. Okay. For the owners, the inbound message settings are required so that we can enable the post-processing transform set. And this is what, when I said that post-processing transform sets are associated to an application, this is what right? This is the application, and this is where we are associating the post-processing transform set. We are not associating it to a particular B2B connection. Any questions?
So Alok, just wanted to confirm. I mean, here in the transform set, we are only adding the maps, right? I mean, the transform sets. The PPT concept is altogether is different one that has to be, raised by the ATS tickets into the CTCM,
Yeah.
right?
So you will do that. You will do that. The TI team, if it is
Yeah.
not a standard PPT, TI team will create that. It will get deployed. Then you will create a post-processing transform set under transform set option, B2 integration transform set. Once you do that, you can come back here and you are just now linking the post-processing transform set to your application for all the input messages.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So if this step is done, and if that is completed, then we can go ahead and see what's next on slide. So next on the slide is, oops, is this next? Okay, yeah. So next on the slide is now you should be all ready to send your first transaction inbound. Okay. Now there is something that I realized, so let me do that first. First, what you will do to send the transaction inbound is you go to the FileZilla, and then you have the SFTP account created. You'll put in the details in your FileZilla, right? And I'll show you that as well. And then you should be ready to send in the transaction. Now, let me do something first because I should have done that. Maybe you might not have the file for sending or testing. So try and do that. Let me send you guys a sample file. So if you go to this link, I think this is the quickest and easiest way. I'm going to share the link on the Zoom chat. So if you go to the link, you should be able to download a sample POX12. Okay. So let me know when you can do that. Just want to know if you can access the link. Okay. So once you have the sample POX12, you can open it in any editor. So I'm using Notepad++. You can use Notepad, Notepad++, and you will open the sample POX12 file in the editor. And we are going to send this file into your system, right, in your SFTP folder. And also, let me log into FileZilla so that I can guide you. You see my FileZilla screen? No, I'm sharing my screen. Let me share my screen. Okay, so if you go to FileZilla, what you'll be able to do is you'll click here, Site Manager, you'll create a site. If there is no site already created, or if this is created, you'll click on New Site. Okay, and then you can change the protocol to SFTP. You need a host name. Username is the username of SFTP connection that you had created, and you have the key file. So you'll have to change your login type to key file. You'll browse for your private key, right? And you'll put it here. So once you have all this created, you should be good to click on connect, and then system would ask you for a passphrase for your private key. So let me very quickly put this host name also in the chat so that you have to go and find it. So that's the host name. So you'll select protocol as SFTP, host name. I've sent it in chat. Change the login type to key file. Use your username. So if you go to login to your Opus system, go to XTT application, go to B2B connections, you'll see your username there. Then you would click on key file, browse the key file which is saved locally on your PC. And once you have selected the correct key file, you will click on connect. Okay, so if I click on connect, system should ask me for a passphrase or password for key file. Now, just in case, if you don't remember the pass key or passphrase, then your options would be to generate new set of public and private keys and use it here. So if by any chance you do not have or got your public and private key, then what you can do is you can go here, search B2B connection, click on your connection, edit, and add a new public key here and keep the private key for this new public key and passphrase with you, and you can use that for. Now, once you're logged into your SFTP connection, we are planning to send an X12 inbound. So your folder hierarchy would be under inbox. If you click on inbox, click on create directory, and you should make sure that you've not done it already. But if you have not, if you don't see any subfolders inside the inbox folder, you'll click inbox, create directory, xtt underscore x12 is going to be your subdirectory here. So let me put this one as well. You'll say xtt underscore x12. Now, all the transactions, irrespective of which transactions they are PO, ASN, invoice, POAC, and so on, they would all go inside xtt underscore x12 folder, because x12 is a standard format and XTT knows how to read the incoming x12 file to figure out the actual transaction type. Okay. Once you are able to do that, and if you have any issues, you can just put it on chat and pause me. If you want, anything is fine. Let's make sure that people who are following along or doing hands-on, they can do that. Okay. And you can do it later as well if you're following along. Then open this sample POX12 if you have already got the access to the Google Drive, the link I just pasted on the chat. So you can open that. If you open that, you will see this sample X12 file that is available there. Okay. Now, then in this X12 file, these two parameters that you see here, which I have highlighted right now, these are sender and receiver. Okay. And in X12 also, like in TraceLink, we identify based on identified type and value. So these are type and values. So 07 type means GLN, and then you have a GLN value. And then you see ZZ, which in X12 world means mutually agreed identifiers, and we are mapping it to company ID, right? So there are two options. You can either use the same file, try and drop it in XTT. It will fail, of course, because this might not match with the sender and receivers that you have in your system. The other option would be to edit this file and put your own sender and receiver. Now, since you are going to send this X12 from the owner side, owner company level identifier needs to be your sender ID. So your company might have a GLN at company level or a company ID. If you have a GLN, you can keep 07 as it is, and you can just simply replace this GLN value with your GLN value, your company's GLN value. If let's say your company does not have a GLN, you can change this 07 to ZZ and then type in the company ID for your company. Okay, similarly, the same thing you would do for the receiver as well. For receiver, if your partner company, you have GLN for your partner company in your master data, you can put that GLN here, change this ZZ to 07 so that type is GLN and the value is GLN value for your partner. Or if this is a company ID, then you will replace the company ID.
So look, for my partner, the primary identifier is FaceLink ID. So is there any identifier for that, or I mean,
And it doesn't matter. You don't need to mention the primary identifier. It can be any identifier.
sure. Okay. Thank you.
Now, one thing to be aware of is that X12 format is it is a very restricted format. So you'll have to make sure that the character difference from here to here, where the other ZZ starts, should be 15 characters or 15 spaces, including the actual spaces as well. So if my GLN is, let's say, 13 digit, 14, 15, and then I can have CZ, right? The next CZ. Similarly, for company ID, whichever number of digit this is, you'll have to calculate the exact character set here. Oops. And make sure that this is 15 characters, right? Otherwise, this would not follow the standard X12 format and the file will fail.
Alok, assuming we made an error, for instance, do we get a specific error message when we make this mistake? Or is that a silent failure?
The error message you would see on XTT is your incoming document could not be read, because XTT does not know the format. No, you will not get the specific message saying there is extra space added here.
Do you know if it's something that is going to come up, like a more explicit error message in XTT?
There are many explicit error messages planned, but I'm not sure about this specific one. At least I don't remember it on top of my head.
Okay, noted. Thanks.
But if you don't find one, feel free to create a new ticket. Okay, so once you are able to update the sender and receiver IDs, save the X12, and then you can simply drag and drop this X12 to your inbox under XTT. You can go to XTT underscore X12 folder, drag and drop or upload your transaction. When you drop the file, it will take a couple of minutes. It is successful. It will move to XTT underscore X12 from XTT underscore X12 folder to accepted, inbox to rejected. And you can also verify XTT search B2B message state. Now, let's understand what happened when we sent our first transaction, right? What happened behind the scenes? We all know, we all configured what happened on the UI, how we configured the UI, interacted with the UI, but when we dropped the file, then what happened? Okay. So let's get into the concept of B2B. Okay. Now, again, before I start explaining these slides are taken from the product team directly. So at some places, these might have much detailed information, which probably I can find difficult to explain sometimes, but I'll try to do justice. Okay, so what we should understand is B2B TP, B2B transaction processor. It is the Opus application that would allow exchange of messages, right, between different companies. Now, these B2B transactions, the file that we dropped into the folder, they're either inbound or outbound. We are talking about one single transaction. So that transaction can be either inbound or outbound, a purchase order inbound or purchase order outbound. It cannot be both. When you drop a transaction, this is purchase order inbound. You receive it, purchase order outbound, not both. Now, B2B transactions are always between owner and a partner, or owner and themselves, never partner to partner. So that is a very, it might look like, yeah. So partner to partner means a transaction where both the network nodes or both the entities do not own it, right? So what we are trying to say here is there should be at least one entity which is the owner of Mint. And you would think that if it is partner to partner, then why are we trying to send the transaction, right? But it will get clear in the other slides, in the future slides, that there is actually a use case from B2B perspective where we send transaction between partner to partner. Not from Mint's perspective. Mint is an application, a separate application. B2B is a separate application. So everything that we are talking about here is with respect to B2B, right? So, okay, so let me quickly just tell you because it's there on the slide. So one is why we said that transactions can be either inbound or outbound, not both. So what is the concept of transaction for Mint is a company, a sender sends the document inbound, and then it goes outbound to the ERP. So it is the same transaction. It goes inbound and outbound both. So PO inbound in Excel format goes outbound in IDOC format. But from B2B perspective, on inbound side, it is one transaction. On outbound side, it is another transaction. So that is why we are saying it is either inbound or outbound. It is never both. Whereas if you think from Mint perspective, this is the same PO inbound and the same PO outbound in a different format. Same thing, partner to partner. If you don't have a multi-enterprise application in between, then how we are allowed to exchange the document? At least one entity should be Mint owner. But then there are scenarios when there might be multiple locations of a company that are exchanging documents, right? So a company headquarter might be based out of US, and that company has separate entity or two locations in company master data, maybe India and Europe, and those two locations are exchanging document, right, between them. Now, when that happens, from Mint perspective, if you see, that is, I should not say Mint perspective, but that is essentially partner to partner, because Mint is licensed for the company, not for the every location that that company has, right? For B2B, that exchange never happens from one location to another location, and we'll learn about it. For B2B, the routing is different. Okay. Now, this is how your inbound and outbound is handled through B2B. So you sent a transaction. So this is a transaction that we sent from either AS2 or we were using SFTP. It can be owner or partner, whatever, whoever's XTP. First thing that happens is we parse the EDI file, right? We check the format of the EDI file. We sent the EDI file to get transformed into the canonical, then the post-processing transform was applied, then that file was sent to owner's Mint. Then owner's Mint processed that file, generated an outbound canonical, then there is B2B, then there is a transformation from canonical to customer format, and then the file is sent to XTP, and then the file is sent outbound. So one diagram explaining the whole transaction exchange. Right, so inbound and outbound is managed in this way. Okay, now before we get more into what happened when you drop the file, we'll pause for some time and we will learn about the network node IDs, because that is one of the important concepts to understand. Okay, and the other concepts that will come after this would be highly based on network node IDs. How does B2B process a document and what does it use? So that's why we are going to learn network node IDs. What are network node IDs? So network node IDs are very similar to those 36-digit GUIDs that are used to see, right? On Opus, every entity has a network node ID associated, right? Now, those entities, when we say entity, it can be owner company, owner location, partner company, partner locations, right? Each are treated as a separate entity or with a unique network node ID. So a company has a network node ID, but this company's location, if this company has two more locations, those are two different unique network node IDs. They're unique. They do not exist on network anywhere else, but on that company or location itself, right? So essentially, conceptually, you can think of the network node ID as IP address. So if there is this big tracelink network and you are given a network node ID, you can actually go and find which company or company location, partner company or partner location we are talking about, right? Now, one caveat is IP addresses are sometimes dynamic, assigned dynamically, but network node IDs, once they are assigned, they cannot be changed. So when you create a company, you create company locations, and there is this network node ID that is generated in the backend, and that network node ID cannot be changed. Okay. Okay. Now, quickly. So that was the concept of network ID, node ID. Just keep it in mind, and then we will move to another concepts, right? Now, B2B, there are different sets of processing steps, one for inbound, one for outbound, and we are going to learn the inbound processing steps, right? Now, before we get into those details, so first of all, the key pieces of information that B2B needs. So B2B needs 3 key pieces of information. We learned about network node already, right? So B2B needs to know sending network node ID, recipient network node ID, and owner network node ID. What is sending network node ID? Is the entity that is sending the X12 inbound. In our case, that is our owner company. So there will be a network node ID associated to the owner company. Then the recipient network node ID is the network node ID of the partner company, right? Because we have created a link from owner company to partner company. And then the owner network node ID, this is one of the sender or recipient. There should be one Mint owner, right? So these are 3 things that B2B would need, okay, to route the document correctly. So let's get into the processing step. And this is exactly what happened when we dropped our document into XTT_X12 folder. So first thing that B2B did is it tried to identify the transaction type. Okay, B2B gateway only means if you are doing the transaction from the UI, this step does not come into picture. But now when we are using XTT or SFTP, so as soon as you drop the file, the first step that B2B did is it tried to identify the transaction type, right? How does it identify the transaction type? You remember there are 3 types of choreography when we created a B2B connection. The choreography type is called other, X12, and EDIFACT, right? If the choreography is X12 or EDIFACT, those are industry standard format. So B2B has inbuilt mechanism that it can read your file and get the transaction type out of the file. If the choreography type is something else, then so other can be IDOC, can be XML, can be JSON, can be CSV, and so on. Then B2B does not know how to get the transaction type. That is why if you create a B2B SFTP connection, we are in context of SFTP, but applicable for everything. If you create SFTP connection under inbox, you create folders by transaction names, and you drop those files into those folders specifically so that B2B cannot identify that. So we are explicitly telling B2B that this is my purchase order, this is my ASN, and so on. If it is X12 or EDIFACT, then I can simply drop every transaction into XTT_X12 folder, and B2B is smart enough to know what is the transaction type. That's the first thing that B2B does. Okay. So that is what it did with our file. So first of all, when we dropped the file, B2B read the X12 format. It was the correct X12 format. B2B identified the transaction type and it recognized that it is a purchase order transaction. Second step. Now, after recognizing the transaction type, B2B will try to transform the document. How does B2B transform the document? So now remember the transform set screen. There is a transform set created and that is associated with a B2B connection. file is dropped to this B2B connection, right? And there is a transform set associated. B2B also knows what is the transaction type. It will go read into that transform set, what is the transaction type and what is the format associated with that, transform associated with that, right? So it will go read that. It will convert the customer format, in our case, X12 format, into the canonical. Okay. That's the second thing that B2B does. Ignore everything else. We can talk about that later, but that's the step number 2. Now, when the document is transformed and a canonical is generated, then there comes the step number 3, that is sender and recipient identification. Okay. How is sender identified? That is the connection association screen for inbound, right? You send a document on a B2B connection inbound. So you remember it was associated at company level, right? That was the network node ID of the company associated to this B2B connection. So any document that is sent inbound, B2B knows it is the sender is this network node ID or this level. Okay, so it knows the sender because you have already done connection association for inbound. Okay, now B2B has to identify the receiver. Okay, there is no way so far that B2B knows. So what is your sender and receiver? Your sender and receiver were these, right? This was, B2B did not look into this thing, 07 and your GLN value for sender. What it did is it said you send this document on this SFTP connection, and this SFTP connection is associated with this network node ID here.
You sharing something else?
Okay. I'm not sharing my whole screen. Okay. Just give me 1 minute. I always think I'm sharing my whole screen, but yeah. Did you guys not see the X12 also that I was talking about? Okay, so let me see. So this was the incoming X12 document. The very first thing was identify the transaction type. B2B knew it is a purchase order. It did that. Second thing was converting this X12 file to a canonical, which is done using the transform set because you sent it on a B2B connection that was associated with a transform set. Or the other way around, transform set was associated with B2B connection. B2B knew the transaction type. It went, looked into the transform set, and it found out that it is a purchase order transaction inbound. So it executed this transform and generated the canonical. Once the canonical is generated, B2B has to identify sender and receiver. Now, sender is always identified irrespective of what value is here in the file for inbound transaction. And this is B2B. Okay, so we'll talk about Mint separately. This is B2B. This is irrespective of your business application. Your business application can be POET as well. B2B steps will should remain the same. Okay. Now, so here, for the inbound, this is where you send your inbound X12, and B2B knows that associated entity is company, right? It could be company location as well, right? You can make it company location. And now it has taken a unique GUID, network node ID for that company. Okay, so that's the next step that B2B did, and now it knows the sender. So remember 3 key pieces of information: sender, receiver, and owner, right? Who sent it, where to route it, with whom's mint to route it, right? Whose mint would be. Now B2B has to identify a receiver in the document. Okay, what is the receiver in the document? This is the receiver in the document. Now, we discussed network node ID. B2B identifies sender, receiver, owner in form of network node IDs. So what is the receiver's network node ID? Okay. That is something that B2B has to identify, and we have not set it up anywhere so far, right? Not set it up anywhere. Okay, one more thing to highlight here is this process that we are talking about, it is irrespective of who is owner, who is partner. It is just in context of a sender and receiver. Sender is owner, same process is followed or same steps are followed. Sender is a partner, same steps are followed, right? So there is no difference in the steps or the logic based on who is mint owner or who is mint partner. That will come later, okay? As of now, no. So sender is identified based on the connection association for inbound. Receiver is not identified yet. How does the receiver, how will B2B identify the receiver? That is where B2B needs this concept of link settings. Okay, it has to identify a receiver for the document that are sent inbound to B2B. Okay, now how do we create link settings? So we will go ahead, click on configure link settings, and now you can follow along, or if you are doing it in your own company, you can do that. So you can go to B2B integration, link settings, okay, and then select the B2B connection here. Now from company and location, this is going to be your partner company, with which you have created a link, right? So this is your partner company. Okay. Then what you will do is you will type in the ID type and value that is here. So for example, I have the value ZZ Mint AI agent is my receiver. So what I'll do is I'll type in company ID space my company ID value. Okay. If you have a GLN here for partner, you will type or 07 GLN value, you will type GLN and space GLN value. Okay. And what you will do is you can leave EDI version blank. You will select EDI envelope party type, which is this identifier type, which is for the receiver. So for my company receiver is CZ, I'll select CZ here. And then what I'll do is I'll just simply add sender receiver code and interchange value. Just copy and paste it here and click on save. Now, based on what identifiers your company is using. So your B2B connection is the same connection where you're sending inbound, right? Because the search is based on that. You'll select your partner company. You'll select identifier type and value separated by a space. You will select the EDI envelope party type, which is the EDI envelope party type in your actual document, company ID, GLN, DUNS, or whatever. If it is company ID, you'll select ZZ. If it is GLN, you'll select 07. If it is DUNS, you'll select 01. And I don't know anything after that, but you can find it out. You'll select EDI envelope party type and then same sender and so this identifier value, you can just put in here and click on save. That will create your B2B partner config object. No. Okay, so good question. So far, what we have been discussing here, the B2B processing steps, this is not document specific. There are differences. How does it identify the choreography type other or X12? But the steps are not specific to X12. Same thing would happen for IDOC. Same thing would happen for Edify. This is B2B trying to identify sender and receiver, which is irrespective of the document format. Okay. Has everyone created it? Whoever is trying to do it.
But I don't have some more fields.
We'll talk. Right now, only extra. We'll do it when we do it from the partner side. From partner side, we'll be sending PO at inbound. Right? So we'll do that there. Now, very important to understand why we are creating these settings. So this setting for inbound is created only so that B2B can find out receiver ID. Now, there is also a point to note. We discussed all the configurations and then dropped a file and then came back and discussed link settings, right? One of the configuration that was missing. There is a reason for that as well, because the link settings behave differently for inbound and outbound. So we'll get into that. But so far we are on inbound side, which is again, irrespective of who is owner, who is partner. Same steps will be followed. Okay. Okay, so if you have completed that link setting part, so what we will try to do is, without waiting, once we have done that, we will send our transaction one more time. We will drop the file one more time. So same file, drag and drop it on the folder, this XTT_external folder. Now we should make sure that everyone who was getting this error of B2B partner config not found, the error like this, that error should go away and your file should move to acceptable. Now, after it has identified the recipient, it will move to routing step, right? Now B2B knows sender, receiver, and transaction type, so it knows how to route the document, right? Who's the owner, where to route the document. So if it was a partner who was sending it, then B2B knows sender, receiver, owner. So one of the sender or receiver should be owner, so it would route it to owner's mint. In our case, it is owner that is a sender, so it will route it to its own. Okay. If whoever is sending the transaction, they both don't license Mint application, the transaction. Okay. And then finally, owner routing and customization. Customization means the post-processing transfer. Okay. So the process will take place and everything will happen. It will be decided what is the subtype, what is the process network, and so on, because B2B did not create process network. And now when the process network part is done, okay, then the message will be delivered to the business application inbound. This is the inbound processing step. Okay. So if this is successful, then you should be able to see the transactions available on your process network under all business transactions. It doesn't matter it passes or fails to get delivered outbound. At least you should see a transaction. And depending on whether you have PPT correct post-processing transform in place, it can resolve the process network. Okay. So what you should be able to do is, if this is all successful, then reassign streams for my process network. But so your company has only one process network or three, and PPT can resolve those or not? No, then you will not see that knowledge. But if you have just one process network and you have the correct PPT, or more than one process network but the correct PPT, then you should be able to see it. Can anyone on the call see the correct? There is. Can anyone on the call see a transaction appearing on your Mint process network?
Look, I can see the message as success, but I cannot see in the business transaction when I go into my
Okay.
net.
How many process networks do you have?
I have multiple actually. I have three.
Okay, that should not be a surprise.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Anand.
I can see it in the business transactions for me.
Oh, awesome. Can you share your screen and just let others see it? How does it see?
Let's hope it's
If you
actually now. But
okay, great. Good. Now, so one of the things that has happened is you can see this transaction here. The status is sent, result is delivered. You have the type purchase order. You don't have a transaction ID here, which means something is wrong with post-processing transform, but that's okay. You have the correct sender and receiver. You have the input file, but not the output file. Okay. Now let's see what is the state. So if you click on these two dots, transaction ID dots, oh, awesome. There is no error. It says delivered. The canonical is generated, but output file is not, which makes me believe that most of the part from partner side are also correct, but we will discuss about that in the next call. In this call, what we were able to achieve so far is sending a transaction inbound to your business application and different steps involved in that, right? So let's make sure that we are all able to do that. Okay, so now we are recording. So post-processing transforms, one of those topics which are very, a little bit difficult to understand, I should say. But once you get the concept, it should be fairly straightforward, pretty easy to understand. So that's why we are going to discuss this. So first of all, the concept of post-processing transforms. So first the name, post-processing transform. So it is different than the normal transform sets that we configure on our companies. The normal transform sets are very similar to the concept of maps that we set up on TTS side. So an inbound transform will convert a customer format into canonical, which will be consumed by the business application. And then outbound map or transform will convert the outbound canonical into the customer format. Now, post-processing transforms are transformed, but a little bit different. Now, before we get into the post-processing transform, there are a couple of things that we need to understand. So one is, what is an orchestration? And again, I have a link down here. I'll have to thank TechCom team again, because these content are taken from the open documentation that TechCom team has done. So orchestrations, first thing, so by the very definition of orchestration, these would be combining multiple business processes across various transactions, right? So how we have identified separate orchestrations is for us external manufacturing set of transactions that create an orchestration called external manufacturing orchestration. Now, some of those transactions can also be common for other type of orchestration, but that also relates to how the business is done, how the different supply chain partners come together and they perform the business for that orchestration. So a couple of examples are external manufacturing, commerce, logistics, transportation, serialized shipment is another orchestration. And if you want to get into details of all this, you have this link. You can go to this link and go through all the orchestrations. And then the other concept or the word that we learned in the last session is process network. So network or process network is a space for collaboration with the different business partners. So a Mint owner or business application owner creates a process network and then links partner on the specific process network, and then those partners can collaborate on the shared workspace. Okay. Okay. Now, with that in mind, let's discuss a couple of other points. So when an external system like ERP, they issue a purchase order or they send a purchase order to Opus, right? that purchase order which comes to Opus, it does not have an information about an orchestration, whether that purchase order is for external manufacturing orchestration, or it is for commerce orchestration, or so on, right? So that purchase order itself does not have any information about orchestration. And neither does purchase order has information about the process network, right? So an IDOC format does not have, or External format or any other format, they do not have a field for mentioning the orchestration or the process, right? So what happens then? Because our business application or Mint, so when you assign roles to Mint, you remember you create a process network, and when you assign role, you first go and find out what is the orchestration, manufacturing, commerce, and so on. And then you find out the role, what is my role, customer or supplier, and then you assign the role. So roles are built based on orchestration, supply chain role, and then edit access or view access, right? So these documents that are coming from external ERP, they do not have this information. And in order to process that document correctly into Mint, the Mint application needs to have this information. So we should have a placeholder somewhere in between where this information can also be added to the transaction, right? And it will be added to a canonical, as you will see in some time, okay? So that is where post-processing transforms come into the picture. So these are an additional step or additional configuration, we might call that, to, we can call modifying or updating an incoming canonical or inbound canonical to include the additional information like process network name and the orchestration. Now, what does orchestration do is it defines us to identify the subtype of the transaction, and we'll talk about that. What is subtype and why is it important? But essentially, this is what post-processing transform would do. That is one of the things that post-processing transform does is adding the process network information and the orchestration information or the subtype information. So we'll see the difference between these two as well. Okay. Now, some common usage for post-processing transforms. So what do post-processing transform do and why they are commonly used for? So there are other usages as well that is dependent on the use case if we encounter any, and we'll learn more about that when we get into specific use cases. But most common use cases is, so first is to resolve a process network where the transaction should get processed. Okay, so if you send a purchase order transaction, now in which process network that purchase order transaction or any other transaction should go to. If for your business application, you have just one process network created, then by default, all the transactions that come into the system, they land into that single default process network, right? But in case there are more than one process network created for a business application, then there is no information in the transaction itself to define in which process network the transaction should be routed to and where the transaction will be processed, right? So that is where post-processing transforms come into the picture. So as long as you have one single process network, B2B does not need to identify the correct process network. By default, it will send all the transactions to the single process network. But as soon as you have more than one process network, then those process network names should get defined into the post-processing transform. The second most common usage is how to find out the correct subtype for the transaction, which is how to find out if a PO is sent inbound from external system, then is that PO for external manufacturing orchestration or is it for commerce orchestration? And why does that matter? Because when you define the roles, manufacturing customer standard or commerce customer standard, there is a sub menu that gets enabled on your Mint screen where you can go and check all the transaction content. What is the PO number, sender, receiver, what are the line items, and so on. So when the system knows that, what is the correct subtype, what is the correct orchestration, external manufacturing or commerce, then you can navigate to that correct role and find out the transaction details. And also whether the purchase order is sent or a transaction is sent by an owner or an partner, right? So owner or partner, anyone can send transaction inbound, but the business application that is going to process that transaction needs to know who is if the sender is owner of the application or not, or if the receiver is owner of application. And both can be owners of the application as well, but from the side that it is sent, whether it's owner or partner. Okay. Third most common usage for post-processing transform is for serialized shipment transactions. That is where we've already discussed that there are certain list of countries that are enabled for Mint. So when you create a SOM sale shipment of type sale on TTS, and you mention one of those countries as ship to countries, those transactions get triggered, canonical gets generated, it is picked by Mint, and then Mint displays that transaction on the Mint user screen, right? Now, if let's say there is a customer who uses Mint for only one of the countries, right? And they do not want, and they are actually doing sales shipment for other countries to their partner just to create records on TTS side. Maybe they are not exchanging the serialized shipment information, or maybe they are creating the shipments for any compliance application requirement, and so on, where sending serialized shipment is not a requirement by compliance. Now, as such, Mint just have one check whether the countries are enabled for Mint or not, as long as your shipment type is sale, right? So even if a customer does not want to use Mint for, let's say, Bahrain country, right? Even then the transactions would show up on Mint and it would obviously fail because there are no link partners, right? But customers do not want to see those transactions on the Mint UI because they are not using Mint for Bahrain country. So in those cases, there is another option where post-processing transform can be used to limit these set of countries for which transactions should get processed. So if we put the list of countries in the post-processing transform that for Bahrain, the transaction should not go to Mint. Post-processing transform will receive the information. It receives the canonical. It will find the ship to country. It will validate if the ship to country is allowed by post-processing transform. And if it is not, it will be just dropped. So Mint will never receive that transaction. So these are three most common uses of post-processing transforms. Any questions on anything? One question in chat, PPT essential for all the transactions inbound. Yes and no both. So let's say yes, okay? Because even if you do not have, and I'm just saying this, I don't want to confuse people here, but even if you do not have the post-processing transform, if you have just one single process network in your company, you send a transaction can be received inbound and get delivered outbound, right? The only thing that will not happen is you will not be able to see the transaction details on the Mint screen because it does not know where to go, whether the purchase order should go to under external manufacturing or commerce and so on. But apart from that, if you have multiple process network, obviously it is required, because if you send a transaction, you don't have post-processing transform, which resolves the process network, the transaction will fail, right? Because it would not know in which process network it should. Okay, any other questions?
So can you please repeat about subtype?
I will talk about subtype. We will slowly talk about subtype. So for now, think of subtype as maybe orchestration. We'll get into more details of subtype. Okay. That is a word I want everyone to get used to because that's very important thing to know. But we will get into a lot of details about subtypes. Okay, now, so again, how does it look like overall? So if you see on the left-hand side, you have XTP application where we have B2B connections created. A customer sends a purchase order. Again, we are taking purchase order as a reference, but it is true for any transaction type, right? So customer sends a purchase order in their own format. It can be any format, IDOC, X12, and so on. The transaction is received on a B2B connection, and then it is sent to B2B TP application, where B2B application. So first thing that will happen is B2B TP application will take the transaction, the customer format, and send it to transform service, where the transaction would be converted to a canonical, right? Because we will have a transform set available there, standard transform set, which will convert the transaction from customer format to canonical format. The canonical is then sent to B2B TP again. And when B2B TP receives it, it then sends it to the post-processing transform. Okay, now the important thing to notice here is for the first transform service, when B2B TP sent the message to transform service, the inbound format for transform service was the customer format, right? But the response from transform service was inbound canonical. Whereas in case of post-processing transform, the inbound was a canonical and the outbound is also a canonical with the information of process network and the subtype and the orchestration, where the transaction should go, what is the transaction type. And then that modified canonical is sent to the business application like Mint. Now Mint knows within the canonical itself, there is an information about the process network and which orchestration it is for. So it will be able to process correctly in the Mint. And if you think why there are different colors used here, so the color for XTT is because that is an enterprise application. So every entity would license XTT. B2B TP transform services, post-processing transform, they are all part of system applications. So those system applications are by default available to everyone. Customers do not need to specifically license these system applications. And then Mint, as you all know, it is a multi-enterprise application, right? So that is why there are different colors. And my choice of colors might be very bad. But that's the reason. Any questions on this slide that is talking about overall how the post-processing transform works or how the transaction flows and where post-processing transforms are placed in the process? Yeah, yes. So that information is in the next slides. So we'll discuss that.
Thank you.
Okay, so how does post-processing transform identifies the process network? Okay, so before we get into post-processing transform, if I ask a one-liner question, what are post-processing transform? Then the answer would be that these are just a simple JavaScript snippets, right? So these are simple JavaScript code, okay? That takes a canonical as input, the canonical which is in JSON format, does some sort of calculation, puts some data into that JSON file and sends it out, right? So that is what post-processing transforms are. Now, identification of the process network. Again, we talked about if a company has only one process network, then we don't need to resolve it. The transaction itself would land into the single process network. If we have more than one process network, right? And there is a caveat if there are unique set of partners linked to every process network. So probably I'll have to modify the language here. So what does it mean is, let's say I have two process network. One is called Mint for commerce, and then another one is called Mint for external manufacturing. And I have two unique partners. So one partner is connected to Mint for external manufacturing, and another partner is connected to Mint for commerce process network, right? Now, first thing is, how do I resolve that using post-processing transform? So example is our test company, Medtronic, has two process network. There is a partner whose GLN is all1 linked to commerce process network, and GLN2 is linked to external manufacturing process network. So when the file gets transformed, the canonical is delivered to post-processing transform. There is this JavaScript code that you can see here as a screenshot. What it does is it first takes the identified type and value from sender and receiver. So it is looking for both sender and receiver and trying to match at least one, right? So when sender or receiver is GLN all ones, then the process network name is Mint for commerce and the orchestration is commerce. Okay. Now again, this is just for example. Your process network name can be anything, right? You just need to know orchestration, and I'll talk about that, why that is important. But so it can be Mint for commerce, orchestration commerce, and then if we have another transaction where the identifier value for sender or receiver is all2, then the process network name that should be set up should be Mint for external manufacturing, and orchestration is external manufacturing. Now, if there is a third partner who is linked to either of these process networks, if that transaction comes in, then again, post-processing transform does not know what process network I should be using if we have not included that information here already, right? So that transaction would also fail, right? So that's one of the usage, how and I'll show you the modified canonical as well, how this information is inserted into canonical. So inbound passes through it. There is a logic that gets applied. There is a field in the inbound canonical that gets populated, and that is how we get the post transformed canonical that is sent to the business application. Now, I very specifically said one partner linked to one process network, right? Because that's the most simple use case. What happens if one partner is linked to more than one process network, right? Then we'll have to put some other type of logic, right? For example, maybe that logic is based on, let's say, products, okay? So a partner is linked to both Mint for commerce and Mint for external manufacturing orchestration, but for certain products, they are doing Mint for external manufacturing, or they are linked for Mint for external manufacturing. And for certain products, they are linked for Mint for commerce, okay? So now the post-processing transform also, or the JavaScript code also has the capability to read the product master data and get some sort of identifier from there to make these decisions. But ultimately, post-processing transform will make this decision that the transaction that is coming in should go to which process network. Okay. Any other question on this one?
Yes, Alok. So, for example, let's say we have two partners for one process network, like total of 3 partner and 2 partner for one and 1 for other. Then we have to explicitly mention that 2 partner in the PPT.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea is that any transaction that you send in, system should explicitly know where the transaction should go, in which process network it should go. So you will keep on adding code on top of that.
Okay, so every time we are connecting with a new partner, we have to update the post-processing transform as well.
Yes. So that's the pain point. That's the pain point today, right? Now we have a Jira in place and team is working on that. So there would be a future solution where if unique partners are linked to only a single process network, as long as that is satisfied, then we will not have to explicitly mention it in post-processing transform, or post-processing transform will not be required, because B2B will be able to identify that if the sender or receiver is this partner, then they are linked to only one single process network, and it can route the transaction to that process network. But that's in the future. As of today, that is our pain point. If we add more partners in the system, we'll have to modify our post-processing transform to make this decision. But this is applicable when you have more than one process network.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Alok, one quick question. I have usually seen that there are situations where two companies are almost CMOs to each other. I mean, that's very common situation that I've seen, at least in the US landscape, where Teva could be buying something from Viatris and Viatris could be buying some other SKUs from Teva. And in that case, they could be sending POs to each other for different SKUs, of course. So I'm assuming that's something that can be managed through this configuration as well, right?
Correct. That is, yes. And that is where I'm getting into my next slide,
Okay,
Sarang,
maybe
where
I jumped. Okay.
what we talk about is, till now we have just identified the process network, right? Now, process networks will be created by Mint owners. So if both the companies who are exchanging the document, they are both Mint owners, they will both create their own process network, right? Or if one company is owner and another one is partner, owner will create process network. So post-processing transforms are always deployed on the owner side, right? Whoever is owner. So irrespective of the use case, whether it is service to service or a owner is sending to a partner, a post-processing transform would be there. So first step would be to identify that which process network the document should go, right? In service to service, it would be a tricky concept, but we will get into that as well. So think of it that one party is owner, one party is partner. Transaction comes in. Now we know in which process network it should go to. Now the second part, that is your question specifically, is how does Mint know or understands who is sending the transaction and who is receiving the transaction? Because that is very important for us to know so that the roles are defined correctly, right? Whether an owner is sending the transaction or whether a partner is sending the transaction. So the second thing is knowing the correct orchestration, or this is where we talk about subtypes, right? So that we know where we would display this information on the Mint screen. So you saw in the last slide that we were able to identify the orchestration. If you look at the orchestration, commerce or external manufacturing. Once we have external manufacturing identified, within that external manufacturing orchestration, I have two different subtypes for purchase order. Now, purchase order can either be sent to my system or my system is receiving the purchase order. And when I say my system, I'm talking about Mint, right? So a business application, either a transaction is sent to Mint or received, right? So these are two different types. Now, if I'm the Mint owner, an external system is sending the transaction to my Mint, that is a sent purchase order, right? And if a partner is sending a transaction or purchase order to my Mint and it is getting delivered outbound, that is a received purchase order form, right? Now, so there would be a logic. First, we will identify the orchestration, and then within that orchestration, we will find out the subtype, whether it is sent subtype or received subtype. Those subtypes will always be based on the owner. The reference or deciding whether it is sent or received, it is in context of the owner, right? So when I'm sending it to my partner, this is a sent transaction. When my partner is sending to me, then it is a received transaction, right? So, so we know, and that is how we manage this situation where one party is sending, I know they are sending the transaction to me. So I managed that, showed it on a different screen. Then the other party, and at that time, the subtype that was set was sent purchase order. Now the other side sends the transaction. I am receiving the same transaction, but at that time, this would be set up as the received purchase order.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, these subtypes are directly related to the roles that we have assigned to our user. So for example, manufacturing, customer, expanded or standard role. So let me again try and explain this role. What does this role say? This role says that my choreography is manufacturing, which is external manufacturing. My role in the supply chain is customer, which means I'm going to issue a purchase order to my partner. I am the owner of Mint. That is why you don't see a word partner there, right? So that is why my role is manufacturing, customer, expanded or standard. What it means is I am going to send the purchase order to the partner. So my subtype is set up as external manufacturing send purchase order, right? And that is how that role, when it appears on the left-hand side menu, if you go to click on that role and you go to the purchase order transaction, click there, you'll be able to see a purchase order transaction there. If you have not assigned for any reason the correct roles, if let's say you assign manufacturing, supplier, expanded or and standard, right? You'll still see a menu. You will go there, you'll click on PO, but you will not see anything there, right? Because the role is not going to supplier subtype. It is going to the customer subtype because customer is the one who is sending the purchase order. The receiving side, on the receiving side, if my Mint is receiving that transaction, which means I'm acting as a supplier, right? At that time, and I'm the Mint owner as well, that time my PO will appear under manufacturing, supplier, expanded or standard. Okay, so again, with reference to Mint. So question is, can we say that PPT is like CMO ID, MH ID, workflow? I don't know. I've never thought about it. Maybe I'll have to think about it. I see why you are saying that, but yeah, maybe. There might be some similarities, maybe not all. So if we can, we will we'll put that line as well, that it can be thought as similar to MHIDs, CMO IDs, and workflows. Okay, now these two steps that we saw, so one is identifying the process network and another is identifying the subtype, or where the transaction should go, what type of transaction should get created. That is part of one single JavaScript. So within a single JavaScript, these are two different steps. These are two different tasks. Now, what happens when a modified canonical comes out, right? So what happens is, if you see this is a modified canonical, that will go into the business application. So if you see the part highlighted in yellow, so there are two fields that are added to the canonical. So first is B2B wrapper subtype, which is set up as EXT TraceLink external manufacturing send purchase order, right? This is the subtype that is set up. That is telling our business application Mint that this, we are receiving this purchase order, sending this purchase order. Yeah. Okay. And the other part, which is highlighted in yellow, is called link identifier. Link identifier is nothing but process network name, right? So that is external manufacturing orchestration. So now this transaction should go and get processed into the external manufacturing orchestration. Rest of the part of this canonical, at least for this use case, remains unaffected. So it is canonical in, canonical out, only two extra parameters that are getting added to the canonical by the post-processing transfer. Okay.